So hobby losses and education expenses. The reason we talk about hobby losses is because sometimes it's hard to distinguish between whether something is a business and whether it's a hobby. So if it's a business, then you have to have a business, you have to have the intent to make it a business. You have to have a business purpose behind it. Your reason for doing it is to make money, right? That is why you're in business. If it's a hobby, it's really just something that you enjoy. Although you may incidentally make some money. Now, sometimes hobbies turn into businesses. Sometimes businesses turn into hobbies. The reason we have to make this distinction between the two is because the tax treatment for each is different. So if it's a business, it's subject to, the net income is subject to self-employment tax. So we've got that, and we're going to talk about self-employment tax in the last section here of this chapter. If it's a hobby, you do not get to deduct any expenses that are associated with it. Like, it would not go on a Schedule C. You just claim the income from the hobby, but you don't get to claim any of the expenses that go along with that. Used to be that you could claim hobby expenses to the extent of the income, like the gambling losses were kind of the same thing. Again, that changed with the tax law of 2017. So here's kind of an example. We've got Alex is a CPA, also enjoys woodworking. He makes decorative rocking chairs, tables, and other handcrafted furniture. He spends 10 to 15 hours a week, considerably less time during tax season, of course, making furniture. He had gross sales of $3,000. His expenses for the year were $10,000 from making that. If the activity is treated as a trade or a business, then he would get to have a $7,000 loss that offsets other income on his tax return. So that would be a big bonus for him if that woodworking activity was classified as a business, right? If, however, it's treated as a hobby, none of the expenses would be included, and he would have $3,000 of income that's associated with that. Now, chances are it's a hobby just because there's so many expenses, unless you have to take all the facts and circumstances together. So if he's just getting started, he had to buy a whole bunch of tools, get himself going, and he's intending to make it into a business. Like, he gets business cards, he registers with the state, he gets a sales tax number, he does everything and treats it like a business, then it very well could be a business, right? So some of the factors in deciding whether something is a hobby or a business, they've got these 9 factors listed here. So the manner in which the taxpayer carries on the activity, so like, what is their intent? Like I just said, if they, he's treating it like a business because he's got a business account, a bank account, he's registered with the state, he's paying sales tax, he's doing all that stuff, he's treating it like a business. That might indicate that it is a business. The expertise of the taxpayer and their advisor. So is he an expert in woodworking? Or is this something that he's just getting started with? The time and effort expended in carrying on the activity, they said he's spending 10 to 15 hours a week. That in and of itself doesn't mean that it's not a business, that he's not doing it full time, but it would just be one of the factors used in determining that. Expectations that assets used in the activity can appreciate in value. This one again is that's a little, that one's hard to take just on its own because most assets do not appreciate in value, right? The only assets really that usually appreciate in value are real estate, and he's making woodworking. He's doing woodworking. So that one, again, it's just one of the 9 factors. Success of the taxpayer in carrying on other similar or dissimilar activities. history of income or losses with respect to the activity. This is kind of a big one. A lot of people seem to have it in their mind that if you don't make a profit after 3 years, then it's not a business. But that's not necessarily the case, because again, if the actions that you take, now after 3 years, if you don't make a profit, the IRS may want some more information from you. They may want you to clarify a little bit that it is indeed a business, but that in and of itself doesn't mean that they won't classify it as a business. Amount of occasional profits that are earned, taxpayers' financial status, elements of personal pleasure or recreation. So these are just, all of those have to be taken into account as a whole. No one single factor is determinative. If the IRS asserts that it's a hobby, the burden to prove that it's a business is on the taxpayer. They have to prove that the IRS is wrong, that it is a business, not a hobby. If the taxpayer has shown a profit for 3 out of 5 consecutive tax years, then the burden of proof shifts to the IRS. So if you've had some sort of profit, any profit, for 3 out of 5 years, then it becomes the IRS's burden to prove that it's a hobby, not a business. So that just has to do with who has the burden of proof there. And so if it's a hobby, you don't have self-employment income on it. However, you do not get to claim any expenses that are associated with it. If it's a business, any net income, you have self-employment taxes on it, but you get to claim expenses against it. Last part of this section, they talk about education expenses. Here, what we're talking about are expenses that are incurred to improve current skills, not to be trained for a new position. So, for example, if you're a CPA and you have to take continuing education classes every year in order to maintain your credentials, which you do, 40 hours a year that you have to take in order to continue to be a CPA, that would be considered a deductible education expense if you're making money as a CPA, right? If you're actually engaging in that activity and you have a business as a CPA. If, however, you are a CPA, but you are training, let's say you're going to the Culinary Institute at DMAC. Well, now you're training for an entirely different career. In that case, that would not be considered a deductible education expense. You may be eligible for certain education credits for that, but it does not, because it's training you for a different career, it's not maintaining your current skills or improving your current skills for your current career, then that would not be a deductible educational expense. So again, there's 2 factors here. Maintains or improves skills required in their employment or other trade or business, so their current employment, meets the requirements of the individual's employer or the requirements of applicable law or regulation. So if your employer, and in this case for the employer, if you're employed, you don't get to take these expenses. Your employer will get to take these expenses that they pay on your behalf, but you as an individual, because you're an employee, don't get to take them. But if you're self-employed, this really only applies to people who have their own business, and they're paying for, they're required to have this education for maintaining or improving their own current credentials, then it would be deductible. Let's see. So here's an example. Assume that Leon is a CPA. He's been practicing for 10 years and he works in audit, but he decides that he would like to start a tax practice. He begins taking classes toward a Master's of Taxation program. Are the expenses for the classes deductible? Their answer here is yes, because it's qualifying him, even though it's a different area of his profession, it's the same profession. So even if you decide to go into a different area within your field, then that would be, the education only improves his skills in the CPA profession for which he already qualifies. Those education expenses would include tuition, books, supplies, fees, and any travel expenses that go along with obtaining that education. All right, any questions regarding hobby versus business or education expenses? No?